Since the 2023 Rugby World Cup, Ireland have lost just 6 matches, and up until this month, they've been consistently ranked in the top three in the world. Meanwhile, at domestic level, Irish provinces have won two of the first four URC seasons, and Munster currently top the table. And meanwhile, the Lions were completely dominated by Irish players and coached by the Irish coaches. So, why are so many Irish fans so dissatisfied with the state of rugby in the country? To debate that, I am joined by. Are you my long-term collaborator at this point? Is that what we are?
I think so at this stage between URC, Pirate, my own shows. I think at this stage I was on the Scarlet's pod before. I think this is a long term agreement. But great to be back on the show.
Friend and colleague Caolan Scully once
Yeah.
again joins the HG Rugby podcast. Welcome, mate. So, thank you for joining us. As this is going to be a debate podcast. Last podcast that we did with Joe Santamaria was all about Tier 2 rugby, and that took on a debate format, and I really enjoyed it. So, at some point in this pod, I'm going to be good cop, you're going to be bad cop. At other points, you'll be good cop, I'll be bad cop. But we just want to kind of get into why, despite the kind of superficial, still maybe theoretically being in the golden age of Irish rugby, under the surface, there is quite a lot of discontent. So I'm going to start it off with you being the journalist that you are. You wrote an article lately after the Autumn Nation series from Ireland, and it was called "The Kings Are Dead, Long Live the Kings." Caolan, why did you write that article?
I think the line that I stand by the most is slowly at first, then all at once. And ultimately,
That is the phrase that I hear most often used about Irish rugby recently.
yeah, because that is kind of what's happened here. There was a slight regression, then there was a steeper regression, and now it just feels like, oh, this is kind of done. And it's not to say these players have become bad players overnight, but when you go through that squad, Andrew Porter averages about 70 minutes a game for Ireland. Ty Furlong's been on the go for 12 years. James Ryan's been on the go at test level for the guts of 10 years without many injuries. Tyke Burns a little bit different with his story. Josh van der Fleer is a high minutes guy. Minutes are important here. And yes, Ireland, you know, they look after their players. Player welfare is a huge part of the central contracting model and the Irish contracting model in general. But I think when you go through it, there is that little bit of physical drop off and then a little bit of tactical staleness. And then the squad isn't really changing over time, as you pointed out before. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, those 1 or 2% each, that really cuts it down.
So you talk about the drop off there, then, Caolan. So is it just a case of the players getting less good, or is it also a case of the game plan? Because we know that, this team that we see Ireland in front of us now is arguably still the team that kind of Joe Schmidt kind of built a while ago. And we've seen Joe Schmidt start to fall off with Australia, or at least Australia's results start to fall off under Joe Schmidt towards the end of this season. Now, looking at the stats as I do, I have seen evidence that the game plan is starting to change. But is it still the game plan is arguably ultimately a bigger problem than the personnel? I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
I think game plan is a massive part of it because even though the meta of the game and what's getting rewarded in the game has shifted, and you probably know this from your own numbers, it has shifted drastically. Ireland don't feel like they've an identity at the moment, which is such a weird thing to say. But I did a podcast during the week, and like England have gone back to their big, heavy tight five that they're good at. South Africa's gone back to their forwards. New Zealand are in a little bit of a lurch. France know what they are. Argentina are back to their roots. Ireland, it's hard to know. And then, when you look at the kind of, as I said, those 1% drop offs, the ages and the minutes under the legs and the even just the emotional toll of like some of these players not getting over the line in Europe or in World Cups or in Six Nations. I think it all comes together. And is it all game plan? No, I wouldn't go that far. But it's little bits of everything. And like one of the stats that I plugged out was Ireland's scoring efficiency against South Africa and New Zealand was poor. It was 1.3 points per entry across those two games. That's so far off where Ireland were in 2023. And attack is massive, but then also at the same time, their defense is slightly more leaky, But if you're scoring about 2 points less per entry per game against tier one nations, or what we can essentially say are tier one nations of the top five sides in the world, for the sake of this argument, you're going to really struggle. And we've seen that against France as well. The numbers matched up against France as they did against New Zealand and as they did against South Africa. The only real anomaly was last year's game against New Zealand in 2024, where New Zealand played what we in Europe would call cup rugby. They took their threes, they took their time, set piece was massive, and they grounded out that way. Every other game, teams have been way more efficient than Ireland and have been able to soak up whatever they offer in attack. Where that's coming from, some of it is the pack, some of it is just they're not as physical, they're not as robust, they're not as skillful, but there's not as much speed and there's not as much kind of crispness to the Irish attack as is. And then you add in the fact that like there is a new 10 in there who plays a very different style of game. Their centres, like we all know them, everyone can name off the top of their head. They probably haven't got a run of minutes together. The back three has been fairly disjointed. And when you have a team, and this was kind of described brilliantly to me before, and I'll do a bad job of doing it. When you have an Andy Farrell game plan and team that is based on this is exactly what I want from every position, and we can't change players because then you'd have to ask different players to do different jobs to what they're used to. When you're not getting that consistent cohesion, it's going to be a factor as well. And I genuinely do believe now, looking at World Rugby, looking at how Ireland's stats compare to other nations in terms of selection, I think the era of cohesion in international rugby is dead, to be honest, as well. And I think that is a part of it. Ireland went into Six Nations being so well drilled, whereas now it feels like everyone is just caught up. And that, when your USP is gone as a team, you've got to find another one.
I think that's a great point about your USP as a team, because if you look at I still personally believe that Farrell is a continuation of Schmidt. Now, of course, he's different. I'm not saying he's exactly the same, and of course, there are things that have changed, but the kind of rugby world around them, as you say, has changed, and it feels like they haven't adapted. Now, later in the show, I do want to talk about the personnel on the pitch and why that isn't changing, and if it really is a case of there's no one better or a coach is being one-eyed, and we're going to have that debate. But before we get to that, going back to the game plan again, it's not just the players that haven't changed, but also the coaching staff hasn't changed. You've still got not only Andy Farrell, but Simon Easterby, Paul O'Connell and Johnny Sexton, are maybe not long in the tooth as coaches, but they're people who have been in and around that island's international environment for decades at this point. And the other attacking and defense coaches as well. If we look at contrast and compare to what Razzie has done, changing up his coaching ticket, and what Steve Borthwick has even done, changing up the England coaching ticket every 5 minutes. Is there criticism there that Andy Farrell should have refreshed his coaching backroom staff?
I think so, because ultimately, when you go through the Irish coaching staff, Andy Farrell has been involved in Irish rugby since the January of 2016. He went into Munster first, then stepped into Ireland about 3-4 months later. You have Johnny Sexton, who's been playing or coaching essentially bar a year off since 2009. Paul O'Connell took a couple of years out, was involved with the 20s for a year, but you're talking at 2002, 2015, and then 2020 to 2025. Andrew Goodman played for Leinster. He was gone for years, to be fair, came back in 22, then took on the Ireland job. So you're talking, he's the newest member, because then you've John Fogarty, who has been with Leinster for, again, quite some time. I don't have that exactly to mind. So you have essentially a coaching ticket that have all been there for so long. And it's not, no one ever says or ever admits, oh, it's stale. Oh, it's the same old. No one will ever say that, no matter what job you're in. But it is natural. If you have the same group that have all been there, there's no outside voices, it is only natural that that would come in. And the IRFU love a continuity hire because it is the safe hire. It always is, of course. But when you compare that to maybe Clayton McMillan when he stepped in at Munster, or Jacques Nienaber when he went into Leinster, they just have a different set of eyes. They have a different vision. They have a different focus. It reinvigorates things. And I'm not saying that, bring in Jamie Joseph or bring in, Jason Holland, because he obviously has ties to Ireland. I'm not just saying that for the sake of it. But if rumours are to be believed and Andrew Goodman takes up the New Zealand job behind Holland and Sexton steps up, you do essentially have a squad that have involved in Irish rugby, the most recent only 3 years, and the longest over 20 years at the top level in Ireland. And that is natural that you might see a little bit of a familiarity and a little bit of an insular look at how the game is shaped.
Insular is a great word, and I actually think that in some ways there's a comparison to be drawn between Ireland and New Zealand. Obviously, two countries, similar population. Obviously, rugby culturally is arguably more significant in New Zealand, but four pro teams in Ireland, five in New Zealand. Centrally contracted model, so all the players are paid by the union, and always the kind of um, they are known to, or they prefer to look inwards for promoting. So they prefer to promote coaches from assistants to head coaches, and then from provincial head coaches to island coaches. And that's kind of what's happened with Razor. And if you look before Razor at New Zealand, Ian Foster was Steve Hansen's assistant, who was Graham Henry's assistant, and things like that. And New Zealand are another country where people feel that they have started to fall off. And could it be related to the lack of freshening things up? And the other kind of criticism that Razor is getting is that he's not saying the right things in public. People are watching his press conferences, listening to the statements that he's putting out and going, yeah, this isn't what I want to hear right now. And that is also something that I am hearing said about Andy Farrell, in that he makes a statement and people are like, this isn't what this doesn't feel like you're talking about the real situation at this point. Is that a fair observation?
I think so. I think you had an awful lot from, would take the 20, I know international rugby works in annual cycles, but we take the 2024-25 season. Last autumn, it was largely a sense of, oh, it's fine. These things happen. It's fine. There's no regression. And the Six Nations was the same. And I take you back to Ireland against Wales in Cardiff, where Wales arguably could have won that game. I'm not going to say should, but they arguably could have won that game. And the main talking point around Ireland was, wow, they really battled it out. They really got over the line here. And I'm like, that was the case 15 years ago when Ireland, or 16 years ago, when Ireland went and won a Grand Slam there against an unbelievable team coached by Warren Gatland. But this era of Wales is different. And I think with Andy Farrell, whether it's by design or otherwise, because Heimer Hallgrimsson has this now, Jack Charlton back in the day, we really do eulogize over coaches, especially if they are from foreign countries. And with Andy Farrell, there's some certain people in the media space as well who'll take everything he says as gospel and perfect man management. Perfection doesn't exist in sport. And I do think there's an element with Farrell that he is frustrated that I'm not going to say perfection. Ireland did not get over the line in the World Cup quarter final. I understand that. But that team was as close to perfection as an Irish rugby team has ever gotten. They were Grand Slam winners. They beat everyone in their path. They'd done everything. They played a beautiful brand of rugby that, New Zealand and South Africa were essentially jealous of at the time. You have to remember, like, they looked at Ireland and thought, this is unbelievable. France, similarly, England as well. But that's now gone. And I think when you see Farrell biting back at multiple journalists over the last few weeks, there is a man under pressure there, similar to Razor. A lot of similarities with Razor. Razor was the man who could do no wrong when he was at the Crusaders. He was the breakdancing coach. Farrell could do no wrong in 23. And I kind of track this post-2023 era back to that quarterfinal. Johnny Sexton comes out and says, well, we lost, but we won, in one of the most famous Instagram comments you'll ever see. Instagram, not known for comments at the best of times. One of the most famous comments you'll ever see. And it just sparked this debate of, no, you inspire by winning. You inspire by, the fans were the inspiration. They took over Paris. Everyone knows this. But the team came up short. And there's just been a sense ever since that, like, plucky old Ireland, the underdogs, we tried so hard. Yeah, that's certainly true to a degree. But as a stat I seen today, we'll talk about how, population, South Africa, massive rugby country, massive country. Population is a factor there. But New Zealand, even England have doubled the amount of clubs that they selected from in terms of their actual autumn squad. But their actual percentage per club was entirely different to Ireland. The most that any club had in that England squad was 20%. In Ireland, it's 64%. So like when you break it down bit by bit, all these little things, like you can excuse them when you're winning. When you're a Grand Slam champion, people don't care where the team is from. And Irish football fans will tell you that about Italia 90 and USA 94 before our time, granted, but they'll tell you that. But when you're losing or when you're dropping games that you should be winning, people might look up at that team and say, there's a lot of Leinster in that. Or that's Johnny Sexton's back in as a coach. I didn't know he was coaching. Or, oh, there's a lot of Lions in there, but that doesn't mean, Andy Farrell didn't get them in. And I'm not privy to internal selection discussions, but that can happen with Lions tours. And again, it's just like when you stop winning, the questions will be asked. And Farrell is struggling to deal with that, I think. Similarly to Razor, probably something Rassie Erasmus has never really had to deal with, considering their only drop off was kind of on the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it is always interesting to watch coaches who have done no wrong when they're starting to just get that little bit of heat. And for me, who fundamentally wants to see the best Irish team, I also find it unbelievably entertaining because we finally have a narrative. We finally are not perfect. And there's a beauty. Sport should never be perfect. And there's a beauty about that. Why did hundreds of thousands of Irish people, legally or illegally, watch Rory McIlroy win the Masters back in April? Because he is the ultimate sporting story. And Irish rugby, when they next win a Grand Slam, will have gotten to that point. But at the moment, you're hitting that dip. And you do need the dips. It's peaks and troughs. That's what sport is. And I think that's utterly fascinating. But for Farrell, it is extremely frustrating.
Mean question, is Andy Farrell a man who can't admit when he's wrong?
I think so. I think, to be fair, a lot of people in sport are in that realm. How many pundits, how many players, how many coaches you see, they're never the ones that are wrong. It's someone else.
I can say that Warren Gatland absolutely could not admit when he was wrong.
Probably. And I'm sure lots of Irish journalists picked up on that at the time. But I do think Andy Farrell is, like, the scrum is a perfect example. We're after looking at the biggest scrum demolition of an Irish team since England in 2012. Back in 2012, Declan Kidney came out and said that was hard to watch. That was really difficult. Now it's not a humiliation. The lads were brave. They worked hard. Best 11-point loss you'll see. The scrum, it won't always matter, only certain times. One or two people say South Africa were illegal the odd time. As a referee once said to me, there's someone illegal in every scrum, more than likely at some stage. Like, yeah, he probably doesn't admit when he's wrong. And it's not about standing up and saying, I got this one wrong, the players were perfect. Not necessarily that either, but has he handled the 10 situation perfectly? No. Has he handled the evolution of the squad post 2023 perfectly? No. Have Ireland kicked on in any level? No. They led in the second half against France in a de facto Grand Slam decider earlier on this year. I know Farrell wasn't involved. And they didn't finish second because of how it ended up transpiring. So yeah, there is an element there that Ireland don't want to be seen or don't admit to when they've got it wrong. And I think they have been getting it wrong now for 13 months.
Is that alienating fans?
That part isn't. And of all the random plugs to bring up, Dominic Sambrook of The Rest is History said on a politics podcast that people who love politics think everyone else loves politics. Well, people who love rugby thinks that everyone else is seeing the same discussions. But the reality is a couple of thousand people in Ireland might watch the biggest rugby podcast in Ireland, but 800,000 people are watching the game and all they care about is the game. So all they care about is the results. And it's only when the results start to turn that those lads are looking down their programme or they're looking down the team sheet and they're like, it's a lot of Leinster. But it's only when those results turn and it's only on match day. And it's not even, Japan or Italy or Wales. It is South Africa. It's New Zealand. Ireland have no God-given right to beat them. But they have also gone 1-3 or 1-4 against the top nations in the world of the last 13 months. So, yeah, it's only natural that people will start looking at it and being like, I don't know, that Troy Parrott kid in the football is doing pretty well. Or, hurling and football are doing well. Well, two versions of football there, but hurling and Gaelic football are doing well. That's when you kind of feel the pinch of it.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of draws a line under the Andy Farrell. Well, it doesn't, because we're going to talk about Andy Farrell's decisions moving forward as we talk about the talent debate in Ireland, and let's just call a spade, the over-reliance on Leinster. And we'll be getting into that debate. Before we do, I just want to remind people, if you're enjoying what you are seeing or listening to so far, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. If you scroll down on this page, you will see that there is a huge diversity in topics that we covered. So last week, it was all about Tier 2 rugby and the struggles that teams lower down the rankings are having. Before that, it was a deep dive on Scott Robertson's All Blacks, and we have a weekly French rugby podcast and everything. So if you like a bit of diverse rugby content, talking to people from all around the world, then this is the channel for you. I'm on a quest to 10,000 YouTube subscribers, and I would love it if you were one of them. So thanks to anybody who is thinking of subscribing thanks to this video. All right, Caolan, right, let's get into the meaty one. So first off, I think it's important that we just say for a second and make it known, because unlike on the URC Rewind, we don't have producer Lee to go in and answer all of the comments for us. You are not a Leinster fan.
No, that is correct. I am a fan of the game in Ireland with a pull towards three provinces, one culturally, two by family. But does that mean that I didn't shout for Leinster to win the Heineken Cup final in 2023 or 2019 or 2018? No, I did want them to win, but I'm a fan of the greater Irish rugby system as well, because as someone who mainly supports other provinces, I want to see all four provinces do well. That's a great politician answer.
Okay, so in that vein, I'm going to show you this graphic.
Mm.
So this is the team that was selected by Ireland. I can't actually remember which game it was for. I don't think it says on the graphic, but it was this November.
It's South Africa. Tom Farrell is on
against South Africa. I think that the choice of player that they put on it is just chef's kiss. Like the most debated player in Ireland is Sam Prendergast in his Leinster garb there with a finger over his lips. That's just perfect from the URC who put this graphic together. And what this graphic shows is that 12 out of the starting 15 players plus 1, 2, 3 players on the bench were from Leinster. And the debate and the discussion this creates is this. Is Leinster the only province churning out test level rugby players, or is Andy Farrell putting too much emphasis on Leinster? Caolan Scully, what is the answer to that question?
The answer to your question, Hugh, is that all four provinces are churning out test level players, but ultimately you will not know who is a test level player until you cap someone and you get them into a game and see what they're like. I despise the idea that, for instance, the only centres in Ireland are Aki, Henshaw, Ringrose, McCluskey, and whoever gets called up because of injury. You telling me James Hume isn't test level? Dan Kelly played for England. Is he not test level? Do you know? Could, Jude Postwick be that guy Hugh Gavin called forward? Potentially. Tom Farrell, before he was capped, everyone knew he was a test level player. But obviously, injuries did get in the way sometimes selection. I just genuinely hate the idea that the only test level players are coming out of Leinster. Now, naturally, the Leinster bubble production line is far greater because of population, because of wealth, because of structures, because of, for some level, politics or lack thereof in certain spots. It's unbelievable. But again, you go through that Ireland XV team that played Scott Wilson, Tom Stewart, Lee. Okay, I was going to say Lee Barron. Lee Barron is Munster, but he's from St. Michael's College in Leinster, so he doesn't really count. Darren Murray, I think Harry Sheridan may have played that game. Dan Kelly, who I mentioned, Jude Postwick, who I mentioned. Shane Daly wasn't involved, but he's another good shout. Mike Lowry. Are they test level players? Well, they can be, because ultimately, in rugby at the moment, the URC is at the greatest strength it's ever been. The Champions Cup may not be at the greatest strength it's ever been, but because of the format, you are playing your Toulouse, your Bordeaux, your La Rochelle a little bit more often. And last year, I watched Jude Postwick go up against, I think it was Barassi and Cost. I allow that to be checked for Toulouse last year. He went up against Deporter and Moafana for Bordeaux. He didn't look out of place. 2 weeks later, after that Bordeaux game, do you think he gets called up? No. And that is an issue, ultimately, because you want the best players to be playing, to get that chance to come up through the ranks, to earn the right. And I don't like using the word earn because sometimes guys are just better fits or guys are younger or whatever. But you want them to have that opportunity. And I don't believe that the best possible opportunity is being afforded to every single player. And I'll leave it at this. Tom Ahern has 2 caps for Ireland. Cormac Izuchukwu has 3. Gavin Coombs has about 5. Nick Timoney has 5 or 6. Max Deegan probably has less than 10. John Hodnett has none. David McCann has none. Have you ever watched a European game and said those lads do not look anywhere near to the level? Or a URC game? No, because they've all stood out against. They've stood out against the Bulls, against the Stormers, against Toulouse. Alex Van Dellen has 1 cap. When he was 21, he went up against a Toulouse back row that featured Gelange and Crow and went toe-to-toe and was Munster's best back row on the field that day. So the idea that players are only coming through Leinster is incorrect. I think Andy Farrell has leaned on Cohesion to the point where, like the horseshoe theory, it has come back to hurt Leinster now at this stage.
We'll get on to talking about the provinces, the performance of the provinces, and a perceived dip at Leinster. I guess the chat about the talent, the stat that I found is I kind of got a thought in my head the other day, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go and investigate this, and I told you about it at the time. I found a team sheet from 2022 Six Nations against Scotland, and of the 15 players in that team sheet again 2022 against Scotland, 4 of them weren't on the team sheet to face, I think it was Australia. 2 of those players were injured and 2 of them had retired. So if you were to kind of be a little bit bad faith and a little bit put a bit of curve on the ball and things, you could say that Andy Farrell has not dropped a player on form for getting on for 4 years. Is it that kind of classic cliche that you get about successful teams of it's harder to get out of this Ireland team than it is to get in it?
Well, that just stole my line because I think that's exactly what it is. The easiest way out of an Andy Farrell squad is to retire. Cian Healy, Conor Murray, Johnny Sexton, Keith Earls, Dave Kilcoyne, Peter O'Mahony. Trying to think if there is anyone else. Once you're in that inner sanctum with Andy Farrell, it is very hard to get out of. Now, you flip that on its head, right? And yes, I understand Andy Farrell was Lions coach. England have moved past Finn Smith this autumn. Whether you agree with that decision or not, and I'm a huge Finn Smith fan, as you know yourself. They moved on from him because he was not the informed guy at the moment. They moved on. Would Ireland have made that same call? I don't think so. I don't think Ireland would have put... Okay, Ireland could have put 5 Lions on the bench because obviously Ireland had 16 Lions in the end. But I don't think they're benching Sheehan and Porter and James Ryan and Jack Conan and Gibson Park all on the same day, for instance. So, and obviously Finlay Bealham was the backup on the bench, as was Tom Darkson, so it's a little bit different in that position. So it is definitely a case that it's harder to get out than it is to... Well, it's certainly hard to get in as well, but it's quite hard to get out of the squad. And once you're in Farrell's inner sanctum, and I even look at, say, Finlay Bealham, who has been a fine player, had a very good Six Nations this year, does it make sense that the backup to Tadhg Furlong, in a position where Ireland have typically not produced a lot of players, is older than Tadhg Furlong? I don't think it does. And that's not Bealham's fault. He can't go back and change his date of birth or anything like that. But again, would other countries go that way? I don't think so, unless they had to, in which case they absolutely would. South Africa can do that because they have so many players. But in Ireland, like, we're 2 years into a World Cup cycle. Scott Wilson's breakout game was the week the internationals came back for the World Cup in 2023, and he's yet to be capped. So is there an issue there? Yeah, absolutely. And I made the point on the Interpro show, a sister show, a brother show, a stepsister show of this. I don't know how exactly to describe it. I would take a French summer next year. Like, I absolutely would. I would go down that route, go with a French summer. Ideally, you probably still beat Australia, even if you have, say, a backline of Casey, Crowley, Stockdale, Dan Kelly, James Hume, Rob Balakoon, and Mike Lowry.
This is Australia, who might at that point be coached by a cardboard cutout of Joe Schmidt. We don't know.
Exactly, which kind of, I was going to say that's what Les Kiss is. Les Kiss is a successful coach where he's been under Joe Schmidt's shadow for quite some time in Ireland as well. But can they win in Australia? Yeah, they could beat Japan. Would you mind if you went 2 from 3 with that bunch of players? Absolutely not. Because this is part of the issue that we started with at the start. It's one thing to lose, it's another thing to use up all that goodwill. But when you're losing with the same guys that were winning, your natural inflection in every sport is maybe we have a look at the next guy. And with the exception of 10, we have not done that. And yes, Paddy McCarthy took his chance, as did Jack Boyle later in the year. But with the exception of 10, we haven't consistently looked at the next man. And that is a gaping problem.
Okay, last question before we talk about the provinces. If we go back to this team sheet, and we said that there were 12 in the starting lineup from Leinster. But if we look at the ones that aren't from Leinster, you got Mac Hansen, who made his debut in Super Rugby. You got Bundy Aki, who made his debut in Super Rugby. And you've got Tyg Byrne, who came to Munster from the Scarlets. Where did they get him from? Where the Scarlets get him from? Leinster Academy. How does that make you feel?
Oh, ho, ho. This could be an hour podcast in and of itself. Um, I so peek behind the curtain briefly. I did a lot of content for the Rugby World Cup, and I did a feature article with 2 girls I went to school with in Ballinasloe, County Galway, who had made the squad. Now, those 2 players were Maeve Deedy and Avian Riley, fullback and scrum half. Bevan Parsons was the third from the club. That's one club in the west of Ireland. There was 4 players from Dublin in that squad. Now, I'm not hating on Dublin, but if you read a squad by the list of counties, there are 32 in Ireland for the sake of rugby. And one has, I think, 18 or 17 counties represented, and the other one probably has a lot less. More than likely, it's Dublin, Kildare, Wicklow, it's Cork, Limerick, it's a couple up north. You know, it's not that high, and then it's obviously your foreign-born players. Which one are you going to go, yeah, that's the one I want to see playing for my country? And it's nothing got to do with the individual personalities. I'm never going to say Josh van der Fleer doesn't represent me. He's one of the best players Ireland have ever produced. He's a phenomenal player. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. But people love representation, especially when it comes to national sport, because how else does sport make sense without some form of representation and some sort of emotional buy-in? And I looked at that Women's World Cup, and a lot of people who I know who would look at this Andy Farrell squad and say, well, maybe it's just not for me at the moment, were loving what was happening at the Women's World Cup, where it's like that person went to the same college or the same school, or because they're semi-pro, I've worked with this person, for instance. That is incredible to have, and I hope that never leaves Irish women's rugby. But Irish men's rugby will never feel that same buy-in unless it goes back to being more representative. And there's no natural way to do this. And I don't want to put in quotas or put in hard rules. But again, are we over reliant on Leinster? Yes. It's not about throwing them all out. Absolutely not. Too many fine players have come through Leinster to throw them all out. But if that squad was more rounded, and say that 13, went down to 7, and you had an extra one from Munster, 2 from Ulster, and an extra one from Connacht. Or, sorry, there was 2 from Connacht. So 2 from Munster, 1 for Connacht, and 2 for Ulster. Do you think people would be more bought into it? I absolutely think they would. Do you know, I think it captures the minds quicker. And I look at the World Cup, and this is such a small example again. I went out for all the World Cup matches because they're all nighttime games, bar Romania. And Ireland Samoa 2 weeks before the World Cup, pub was full. There was a buy-in. There was a feel-good factor because they're winning. I went out for Ireland Australia, a game which, okay, it wasn't a coin toss game at the end, but it could have been based on last year. There was no one in it. Do you know? That kind of like, oh, we got to go out, we got to watch it, it's main event billing, isn't really the case anymore. And that brings you back around to not just representation, because I think that's a factor, but when the wins stop, representation becomes higher and where the players are from becomes higher. And it all just becomes, there's a spotlight away, it becomes more wide. It becomes less narrow vision. And I think that is, again, something that Andy Farrell is kind of struggling. I think he struggles to get his head around because he gets asked the whole time about how many Leinster players are in the squad. They say they don't pick based on that. But I do believe they
That's
pick
hard to
based on,
believe.
I find that hard to believe as well, but I do think they pick based on training, which is seemingly massive. And well, if you're playing a Leinster style perceived in training, of course the Leinster players are going to come in more naturally. It's normal. Like if he went for a Munster style, he'd probably pick more Munster players. But he's going towards those Leinster players because that's where he feels the best production is. And again, as I said, and we're probably going to answer that now in a second, arguably, Leinster are now being hurt by it with the new central contracting changes and with their own depth charts.
Yeah. And we're going to move on to talk about that just now. But before we do, I just want to remind everybody that if you are especially particularly enjoying what you're seeing so far, and if you're this far into the podcast, I suggest that you might be, reminder you can get membership to this here YouTube channel for just 99 pence per month. All of that money goes back into funding me being able to create more content, being able to do better content. And if you go for it, you will get access to weekly exclusive videos that you won't find anywhere else. This is where I post some behind the scenes stuff, some outtakes, and also some of my more candid and slightly honest views that I only feel comfortable sharing with my best friends. And if you become a member of this YouTube channel, you're officially one of my best friends. So thank you in advance to anybody who fancies taking me up on that. And I shall see you there. All right, Caolan, let's get into the provinces. So I'll bring up the URC table. Munster currently sits second. At time of recording, they're about to take on the Stormers, who sit first, in a winner takes all, someone's own must go style competition. Clayton McMillan has obviously come into Munster, so if we start with them, is everything happy down Cork?
Limerick as well, I should say. But I don't think everything will ever be always happy. This is not an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but I think it's off to a great start to the season. I was in Crow Park this year for that game, covering it for work, and there was such a buzz like from the Munster fans I met after that game. It was, oh, there's something different, and there's always something to be said about. Okay, Clayton McMillan maybe not had the biggest name according to the armchair fans, but for rugby fans, he had a big name. Big name head coach with a bit of an aura coming in and making a fast start, like Razzie Erasmus did all those years ago. There's always something to be said for it. And again, winning is a drug. And I think for Munster, if they are to get over the line, I do believe they'll beat the Stormers this weekend. Looking at the Munster team that they put out, if they start unbeaten going into Europe, like you're at the point where everyone else in Europe is taking notice. You know, your Bats, your Toulons. I think that caliber, below the Bordeaux, Leinster, Toulouse, that caliber below, I think they're all starting to take notice. So it's a very good start to the season. A long way to go. Signings to be made. Injury luck needs to continue. But you look at that squad. You got Ty Byrne playing some great rugby. Craig Casey playing the best rugby of his life. Jack Crowley looks excellent. Kelly, Nankerville, Farrell have all been superb to start the season. So yeah, of course, vibes are really, really good there.
And Ulster as well, 3 from 4. Obviously had a game against Edinburgh, ruled off because of the weather. Maybe not so much grand changes in terms of the big name stuff, but they've got in the two new assistant coaches, right?
Yeah, Jimmy Duffy and Mark Sexton, or sorry, three. Jimmy Duffy, Mark Sexton, and Willie Falloon are all involved there now. And in fairness, like Ulster, budgetary wise, probably shouldn't be anthem more than top six in the URC. In terms of just squad depth wise, they probably shouldn't be anymore either. Like they've used the fewest amount of players of the four provinces so far. Even with a game less played, doesn't look like they have a whole pile to bring in. But they have Angus Bell to come in. They signed Gerardo Augustus. Jack Murphy and Nathan Doak look formidable. They've got great centre depth, no more than Munster with McCluskey, who was sidelined, Postlewaite and Hume. One of the best back threes of the northern clubs in the URC with like Stockdale, Ward, Lowry, Werner Koch, Rob Balakoon. Wonderful talent. Stuart Moore just back from being recalled from his loan as well. They're in a great place. I would have a little bit of buyer beware just because if they do start picking up injuries, what's their depth like? Is it strong enough to sustain them? But if they can stay relatively fit, already beaten the Sharks, they've already beaten the Bulls. If you can go 3 from 3 in the interpros potentially, I think you're flying it then.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then but we'll get on to Leinster last because I think that's the most juicy one based on the season they've had so far. Quick line on Stuart Lancaster at Connacht. I feel like that it's a move that a lot of people in Ireland were very excited about. However, me being a bit more detached from it, I was the jury was always going to be out for me until at least the end of the season. The results haven't necessarily been going their way. It is very early days, only 4 games played. What's your take on it?
Yeah, well, if anyone who listens to this tunes into the Interbro show, I did say I'll judge Connacht after the first 5 games because they had a real mix of fixtures. They'd Benetton, Scarlets game postponed, as you remember yourself. Cardiff,
Which they would have lost.
your opinion. Cardiff, Bulls, and then Munster. They went 1 from 4. You can't go 1 from 4 in those games. You got to beat the Bulls or Cardiff. I know the Bulls were in Galway. They're always a tough opponent. Got to win one of those 2 games. And in reality, they almost beat the Bulls by virtue of a late comeback. They weren't the better team in that game. They were pretty dire against Cardiff. And then the Munster game, arguably their best performance, was arguably Munster's worst. So that has a little bit of concern there as is. So not a great start. I do think the fact that they'll have the Challenge Cup to, guaranteed of 5 games, realistically, they're if they don't make it out of the pool, there's a bigger issue. Probably guaranteed 5 games there where they can rotate, they can chop and change, and they can try out new combinations. But even for a team in transition, it feels a little bit like a frustrating start because they were so good against Benetton. They were so good in that opening night. But now it's like, oh, maybe that was more about Benetton than it was Connacht.
Potentially. And now the big one, Leinster, 2 from 5 to start the season. When has that ever happened? And the narratives are now the whole Jack Nienaber narrative of he's ruined them type thing that's going on. Um, yeah. What it do we just need to enjoy it before they just get back on the rails and walk the rest of the league?
I think it's too late. I think you've less than 24 hours at the time of recording to keep enjoying it because I think they will put a beat down on the Dragons, put a beat down on Quins, get back into the flow and beat Leicester, do what they do at Christmas Interpros and win at least 2 of them. I think they'll beat La Rochelle. I think they'll beat Bayonne. Then it's Six Nations time and it's going to be a long time. They've a lot of time to get up to grasp. The only thing I will say is Leinster have lost 3 URC games. If they're fighting for top spot, which they want, got to be close to perfect from here, which is really, really tough to do in any stretch of the league. They've got to be close to perfect from here on in. Those interpros in particular, where they're going to be asked to rotate, especially coming off alliance somewhere where Leinster had so many alliance. And the fact that most teams who are the bus suppliers to the Lions suffer a lot of injuries the year after. Just ask Saracens how their 2017-18 season went, for example. So I do think they'll bounce back, and I do think they will be what Leinster usually are, and they will be formidable if you are the type of person who may enjoy their downfall. I'll say enjoy it for the next 24 hours, but rumours of their demise have been greatly exaggerated, even if, they're starting to feel the pinch in certain positions and they're likely to lose players to Connacht or to Ulster or to Munster or wherever. I think it's a little bit too soon to be getting the tombstone ready.
Yeah, something that you've mentioned a few times throughout this podcast is things like minutes and things like injuries. And something that I've noticed is one of those things for me that you notice it once and then you start seeing it everywhere. Is there are certain players, particularly Leinster players, but as I'll go on to explain, it affects other provinces as well. That actually a lot of these players don't have that many minutes because of the amount of time that they spend injured. Tyg Furlong being one, Gary Ringrose, Hugo Keenan being a very key example of that. Just it almost becomes a meme of like, oh, so and so is back in training. Oh, they didn't make it to the squad. That's certainly how it was for Tyg Furlong in the Six Nations. Whereas you compare to someone like Hugo Keenan to Tomo Ramos, compare their minutes for the last few seasons. Tomo Ramos is playing week in, week out for Toulouse, literally double the number of games that Hugo Keenan has played. Do we need, and then you look at Munster, it's like the annual injury crisis. And I have heard, rumors on the grapevine behind the scenes of changes have been made at Munster to address this.
Yeah.
Ulster, fell apart because of injuries last season. Do we need to start having a conversation about strength and conditioning of rugby players in Ireland? Are they just not cut out to play a 20 game season? Is 5 good games really the best we can expect from some of these players?
I think there is a slight element to it because their minutes are so carefully managed that obviously, if you get to someone like Gary Ringrose, who has been playing Test rugby since he was about 22, give or take, he's now 30. And even that probably feels a little bit short. It could be since he was 21. It's a lot of time only playing top level rugby. And that's probably the only thing I will say. It's not necessarily, the equivalent of a Van or a Montalban for Thomas Ramos, but they're having to play that equivalent game is going away to Welford Road to play Leicester or going on the road to play Bayonne when they're psyched up in Europe. Just to take Leinster's fixtures for this year, for example. So they're never really getting that kind of, as we say in Ireland, get the dirty diesel out of the tank. They're never getting those types of games. It's straight in. It's the most high octane, the most high physical games. And when you are the team to beat, naturally everyone wants to take a cut off you as well. And we do see that at times with games against Leinster and games with Leinster. Don't get me wrong; they're not angels when it comes to breakdown or high tackles. The more than any other team, no one is a saint. But I think a lot of that is yes, minutes comparatively isn't great, but as well as that, when you're only playing the top games, it is natural to have a little bit more of an effect. And Tadhg Furlong's probably a good example. He only really plays big games at this stage. Like interpros are highly physical encounters. European games, top URC games. Obviously, internationals are a step above again. So yeah, it's bound to drain on you. And like a lot of the Leinster players we talk about, with the exception of Hugo Keenan, they're breaking onto the scene at 21. There is always a risk with players who break out early that their body may break down. It's a lot. It's a long time on the go. Like it's a physical career. Gary Ringrose, Robbie Henshaw, obviously Keenan is the exception. James Ryan, Andrew Porter, Tadhg Furlong. A lot of those, Caolan Doris as well. A lot of those have been playing top level rugby since they were 21, 22 years of age. So when you hit 30 or you hit 31, yeah, it's only natural that you're going to feel a little bit of a squeeze. Like James Ryan was with the Ireland under 20s in 2016. He didn't really play much rugby in the first year of his academy due to injury and was playing for Ireland since the summer of 2017. So essentially, he went from 20s World Cup, not a lot of rugby, straight into the Ireland squad. Now, don't get me wrong, James Ryan at the time was worth it. Like we remember the player James Ryan was when he broke onto the scene. Not doubting that, but when it comes to this point of his career, I think there is that natural wear and tear that has taken place then.
Okay, interesting, interesting. That's something that I'd love to talk to someone more in it, because if you do particularly if you compare Ireland to France, for example, the durability of players is almost night and day. And I'd love to speak to an expert in terms of like a physiotherapist or something as to what goes into that. So that's definitely a podcast for the future. Just the last advert break of the show. Remember, if you're this far into the show, you're definitely enjoying it. So subscribe, get membership. Massively appreciate everybody. And we're going to go into this last section of the show now, talking about journalism in rugby in Ireland. Okay, Caolan, you are now talking to me as a legit person, not just some guy I met on the internet, but actual professional rugby journalist now. How have you found moving into the kind of professional rugby space?
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Now I haven't been solely on rugby in terms of the full time work that I had over the summer was doing a little bit of everything. I was doing GA, League of Ireland soccer, obviously rugby, golf as well. So I enjoyed all that. But it is enjoyable. Like being in Croke Park that day for Munster, Leinster, writing about that game, writing multiple articles on that game is a pretty cool experience. Naturally, like the one thing that you can always tell is which sports journalist wants to be there and which one doesn't. And personally, here in Ireland, anyone who's had to sit through the Irish football team in recent years have not really wanted to be there, unfortunately, because things were pretty grim. But with rugby, everyone kind of wants to be there. It's the hottest ticket in town, or it has been, and I've enjoyed it for that, and I've enjoyed it for, you know, I've covered Munster games. Was kind of reporting for RT at Munster Argentina, which is a game that, you know, just bare bones. People are going to be looking up that game in a couple of years' time, to see, oh, who played in that again. So there's always that. That's pretty cool. But it is a strange one because rugby in Ireland is quite big in terms of like almost, between 700,000 and a million people will watch an Ireland international game, a big Six Nations game, which comparative to England, or for instance, is actually way better than them. But it is the fourth biggest sport. GEA is bigger. I know we spoke about that a lot last season on the URC podcast with yourself. And soccer is bigger. And, whether I agree with it or not, Premier League soccer is probably bigger than, most other codes in Ireland, despite the fact it's not in Ireland. But they are a conglomerate at the end of the day. So there is all that. And like, it's great people, but I've enjoyed it so far anyway.
And how is the press room? You mentioned people being like not wanting to be there and not wanting to be there. And obviously, I'm not going to ask you for like who's a bastard and who's nice and stuff. But I've had the good fortune to be media access to big test matches twice, and I've actually had another opportunity recently that I didn't go for. And story for another day. But at the first one, it was a Six Nations match, and I was very struck by the sense of there were some journalists who either took it for granted or weren't excited or were just grumpy about it. And it wasn't a great vibe. I didn't enjoy the atmosphere of the media room. That's my own personal experience. The second one that I went to, I enjoyed a lot more. And I had a great day out. But the difference was that the vast majority of the people in that media room on that day were not traditional written press newspaper type journalists. They were content creators, they were YouTubers, they were podcasters, they were things like that. And that was a big change. So what does the media room look like at the moment, the ones that you've experienced? Is it kind of still the I will call them the old guard of the traditional press? Are you starting to see a refresh? Or what I've also seen spoken about in other places is um the journalism in sport being slashed and the numbers dwindling. You tell me what you've seen.
Well, obviously, worldwide, the appetite for paying for top level sports media, and there is Ireland. Personally, I think has some of the best sports writers. I think if you go and read Gavin Cooney, Gavin Casey, Maurice Brosnan, people like that, they're some of the best writers that you will find. So we're very lucky, but the appetite to pay for it is not necessarily at the same level, which is frustrating. Rugby is in a weird one where if you go into a test game, you will find a lot more older gentlemen who've been covering the game for years than you would at, say, a provincial game. So if I go to Munster Stormers this weekend, there'll be one person from the Irish Independent, neither of which are any more than not mid 40s, early 40s at the absolute most in terms of their two primary writers. The 42, the eldest of them is, 30s, mid 30s, I'm pretty sure. The Irish Times, fair enough, has a slightly older writer base, but that probably is in line with their readership as well. And yeah, it's a weird one because, granted, I'm 24 years of age. I would be the youngest in almost every room, bar when I went to Ireland, Japan, and there was like two people younger than me, which was a bit strange when I'm so used to be the youngest one in the room. But yeah, there is that. But I think as well, where we're very lucky in Ireland is there is a great camaraderie. Like anyone who I've worked with, be it at IRFU, Munster, or whatever gigs, have been very helpful, very friendly. Like I went down to cover Munster's media day in UL at the start of the year, sat down, how you get on, how's things, how you getting on? Like there's no like, oh God, this young person is here to take our jobs vibe, which can happen. Like it's an industry that is kind of strapped for cash ultimately. So you can get that, but never really got that sense. But it is frustrating that in Ireland, where we have so many good sports writers, that there just isn't the paid appetite to keep it all going. And like rugby is one of those. Like, do we have enough for? And I'm going out on a limb here. Probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I can think of at least 9 or 10 high quality journalists on rugby alone. When rugby is the fourth biggest sport, Do you know, that's where you ask questions. And that's not just the established press. Like one of the best writers you will find is, say, Three Red Kings on Patreon, who does an awful lot of coverage. His writing is fantastic. You know, you'll have people like that as well. And, you know, that's again, that's widespread, no more than in Wales or England or wherever. But yeah, no, like the appetite is, or the vibe is quite good. And one thing that I did find, again, to give credit, the RFU, the day of the Women's World Cup kind of media day before they jetted off for England, because it's a long trip, none of us would make it over to England or time zone issues. But that day there was local radio, there was people like me doing features, there was video, there was BBC, there was RTE, there was Off the Ball, Irish Independent, 42, like all the papers. There was loads of different things. There was even a couple there for like just socials, like RTE, who are the BBC of Ireland, essentially, in terms of the state broadcaster. They had a section for their kids' shows, clips, that they were talking to the players. And things like that are really, really good. And I do think there is that open mindedness in Ireland. But that is the women's game. That is very different. We have to remind ourselves of that, because the men's game won't be going down that route for at least another 5 to 10 years, I feel like, until the squeeze comes on and eventually men's rugby realizes we need to be more accessible, which will happen worldwide. That is my take on it. But no, the media rooms are generally great. Always have good chats. No one ever makes you feel like you're left out. Like my first time in one was more by accident. I was doing some work with Oval Insights before,
Hmm.
and was sat up beside French journalists, so it was a little bit strange. They didn't speak English and I didn't speak French, but since then it has been fantastic. And yes, you'll have days like I was at Ireland Japan, and that was a 12:40 kickoff, and like the thoughts of eating dinner at 11:50 a.m. is a little bit horrible. Like no matter who you are, but also you do remind yourself as well. It's like, look, it's the privileged position. Now, the flip side is the journalists who were there for the Australia game were recording podcasts at midnight, which is also at the other end of the spectrum. But in the main, and I think you see it a lot with the big days, people do want to be there. And it does come across. I do think it comes across in the writing as well in Ireland. Could it be more critical? Could it be more nuanced? Yes, but I think everyone will have that opinion of every writer, of every where. Do you know? No one has ever been said that they're not biased or they're not good or bad or indifferent. Like everyone gets that, whether that's me who's starting out or someone who's 60 years of age. So, you know, it's generally a very healthy dynamic. It's just there is that fear, obviously, of which way it's going to go within the, financial space. Maybe this is the route that's going to end up happening more often. Is it's going to be podcast mediums, because I know the Irish Independent went down that route, and have been quite successful with it, to be fair. So maybe that is the way to go, but can't predict the future again, so you don't know. I'd hate to see written form content dying, but unfortunately with the generation below mine, I don't hold out too much hope, unfortunately.
And you're the generation below me, so think about what I think of you.
Exactly, and you wouldn't be incorrect, because I'm not great for I'm great for writing. I
I'm
actually
not. There's a
read
bookcase
less.
there. I haven't read any of the books on it. Okay, Caolan, mate, thank you as ever for jumping on for me. It's been a great chat. I hope that everybody's enjoyed it. Get involved in the comments. Let us know what you think. We're not afraid of you. Um,
Well used to it at this stage.
yeah. And Caolan, where can people find you these days?
I am on the Interpro show mainly. That's my main source, and I'm writing for all things rugby quite regularly, as is yourself. So you can find the two of us there covering URC, Europe coming up. But the Interpro show, the only province or the only podcast I know with four voices from the four provinces. So what's not to like? What's not better than diverse rugby discussion as opposed to four lads from the same postcode? So not better to spread it around, as you know yourself.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you, Caolan, for joining. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watching all the way to the end. Enjoy your rugby, and I hope that everybody's team wins. Cheers.